All right, folks, I think we are at time. So again, good morning, good afternoon to y'all. Thank you so much for joining today's presentation. This is our first webinar of the year, and we're excited to bring you some pretty interesting information. So before I hand this over to our presenter, I just want to go over some basics. We do have a chat and Q&A feature, so throughout this presentation, if you have any questions, feel free to throw whatever you want into the chat in the Q&A section. We have about 2 or 3 questions that already came in during registration, so we'll of course be answering those. If we do not get to your questions at the end of the presentation, no worries, we'll obviously follow up with you as well. But with that said, let's kick this off. So today we're here to discuss the top 5 considerations when adopting Zero Trust. And to get things started, I'm going to introduce our presenter here. So we have our solutions evangelist working to make Zero Trust network access simple to adopt and implement. Anna Lu. So she is our product team lead here at Twingate. He specializes in enterprise productivity and security software. Her combined experiences across multiple verticals helps our customers work more efficiently and securely. Anna's past work includes time over at Dropbox Business and Google Workspace. So before I hand this over to her, I'm just going to launch this quick poll. Love to get some input from you. All right, so real quick, just kind of curious what everyone in the room has at the top of mind. Zero Trust, what is the first thing that comes to mind to you? Is it strategy? Is it a set of tools? Is it just a buzzword? We will close this poll here in just a second, but just looking for some basic feedback. All right, looks like we have so far pretty much a unanimous result. Let's see if I can share this properly. Hopefully that shows up for y'all. If not, I'll just read off, but Zero Trust unanimously is coming in as a strategy. So that actually works very well for what we're going to be discussing today. But I will let Anna cover the rest. So Anna, it is now off to you.
Thanks, Elliot. Okay. So hi, everyone. It's great to be here speaking with you today. And thanks for joining us for this webinar. So as Elliot said, I'm a product manager team lead here at Twingate and really focusing on bringing Zero Trust to companies and making it easy to implement. So I've worked in the enterprise software space and also, in productivity and cloud computing, and definitely understand how security, network access, all of these things are especially key today. So in this webinar, I'll be exploring the concept of Zero Trust, teasing apart the definition of what it is, and sharing some best practices as you consider implementing it for your organizations. We want to make it easy for everyone to move to a Zero Trust model. So I'll be covering a few things that you should keep in mind. Let's dive in. Next slide. So as we all know, Zero Trust is a pretty popular and overloaded term these days. So to kick things off, let's discuss what Zero Trust is and what it's not. Everyone's got a bit of a different take, so we can explore some of these different perspectives. To make this a little more lighthearted, here's a quick game. We'll call this Vendor, Analyst, Agency. We'll read a core snippet that defines Zero Trust, and you get to decide who came up with it. Excuse me. All right, so first up, Zero Trust is an information security model that denies access to applications and data by default. So again, vendor, analyst, agency, and we've got an analyst for this. Next up, Zero Trust is a cybersecurity strategy wherein security policy is applied based on context established through least privilege, access controls, and strict user authentication, not assumed trust. For this one, we've got vendor. Next up, Zero Trust is a security framework requiring all users, whether in or outside the organization's network, to be authenticated, authorized, and continuously validated for security configuration and posture before being granted or keeping access to applications and data. Vendor. And Zero Trust provides a collection of concepts and ideas designed to minimize uncertainty in enforcing accurate least privilege per request access decisions in information systems and services in the face of a network viewed as compromised. This is NIST's approach. And last two here. Zero Trust provides a collection of concepts and ideas designed to minimize uncertainty in enforcing accurate, least privilege per request access decisions in information, systems, and services in the face of a network viewed as compromised. This is agency again, so CISA. And finally, Zero Trust is a way of thinking, not a specific technology or architecture. It's really about zero implicit trust, as that's what we want to get rid of. Finally, agency. So how'd you do? For something that everyone thinks is the right approach, it sure seems like there are quite a few buzzwords and ambiguity involved. If you're like me, the first thing you'll notice is that there's a lot of variations across the industry, from well-established agencies to analyst groups to vendors and organizations themselves. Their views of zero trust differ just a bit, and it's enough to cause confusion. The second thing is that these definitions aren't the clearest. So where's the straightforward explain like I'm five version? Let's distill it down to its core. Zero trust boils down to continuously asking this question: should this user on this device under this context be able to access this resource? With this, you get all the concepts of the definitions earlier discussed: least privilege access, continuous validation, identity imposter. But what's great about this breakdown is that it's clear, and you can also start seeing how you need to build your security tooling in a way that enables you to answer this question. So let's apply this. For each factor, there's a lot of different possibilities. Next slide. The goal is to have a foundation that's flexible enough to support these many different scenarios that can exist. So let's say, should this contractor on her mobile device be able to work from home and access this private application? Or how might this differ from a full-time employee using a company device while traveling who wants to access an internal database? This breakdown here enables you to think critically about what matters most in providing or blocking access. It also allows us to map out the necessary systems and tools at each step to ensure that we can validate each component. So you've got identity through your IDPs, device security through MDMs, etc. The important thing to note here is that zero trust doesn't mean zero trust whatsoever. It means zero implicit trust. You start with a baseline of zero, and then through granular controls, contextual information, and user need, trust is established. And then, even regardless of that established trust, constant monitoring and checkpoints are still required. So it's not enough to ask this question once or even at the start of every access. This question has to be revisited routinely to make sure that the answer is still yes. All right, so now that we've defined zero trust in context of this presentation, I want to highlight 5 considerations that are necessary elements when building out your zero trust strategy. These elements come from a combination of research, feedback from our own customers' journeys, analyst reports, and our peers. The first consideration is really just starting from the foundation. As with all major shifts, this requires a comprehensive approach that introduces change at the ground level. And for zero trust, this comes in a specific flavor. So breaking this down, in a perfect world, IT and security teams could simply start over from scratch, but that's not a reality. Zero trust requires a full digital transformation that takes time, is rolled out in phases, and starts from a strong foundation. So how do we plan it all out? IT and security teams need to work together, bringing in their different perspectives and requirements. Oftentimes, this will mean mapping out a joint end state and then building the infrastructure and working backwards to create a phased approach. As part of this process, an organization should also seek to incrementally implement zero trust principles, process changes, and technology solutions that protect its highest value data assets. Focus on the end result and goals before thinking about the path that you take to get there. And finally, most enterprises will continue to operate in a hybrid zero trust and perimeter-based mode for an indefinite period while continuing to invest in ongoing IT modernization initiatives. This ensures that the shift to zero trust isn't overwhelming. Instead, that modernization plan can ensure that moving to a zero trust architecture happens in a way that's gradual, builds in complexity and usage, and supports small-scale workflow migrations. The next consideration is all about the people. So going back to that base zero trust question, verifying the who is a crucial part of the process, arguably the most important part of the entire question. So building a zero trust strategy requires a clear view of functions within the company. Currently deployed software, access levels, and devices, and maybe even more importantly, what each of these requirements will look like in the future. Next slide. According to NIST and Gartner, which mirrors some elements of Forrester's ZTX approach, organizations need to start by inventorying and assessing their current footprint and surveying assets, subjects, data flows, and workflows. This awareness forms the foundational state that must be reached before a zero trust deployment is possible. Having this clear mapping of systems will help you better assess risk, develop the right policies, identify gaps and their needed solutions, and deploy initial phases. A typical first step for many orgs is shifting to a cloud-based identity as a service or getting that IDP in place. This enables comprehensive coverage over identities and can help with the inventory and documentation processes. With that, typically comes support for SSO and MFA, or multi-factor auth. This greatly improves security and is frequently kind of that first step in validating that user identity to achieve zero trust. In addition to managing internal users through that IDP, admins also have to consider management of third parties. This means knowing what external users like vendors or contractors should be able to access and the different methods of and criteria around how this access is granted. While external users might not be in your IDPs, it's still crucial that you know what they have access to and why. One key component around identity is satisfying the least privilege principle, or ensuring that users are only given the access they need to finish a task. This, supported by automated inventorying and monitoring of user access, ensures better protection of your resources and enables quick action in case the answer to that zero trust question ever becomes no. And finally, we also want to consider machine identities, ensuring all connected devices are in a healthy state and being consistently monitored for things like viruses or malware. So consideration number 3. As I mentioned, zero trust isn't about getting rid of trust altogether. Instead, it means zero implicit trust. So what does that look like? First, this means finding the systems needed to establish that implicit trust. We spoke earlier about the importance of inventory. That assessment across identities, resources, and systems will allow you to figure out what gaps are present and to determine the processes and solutions to resolve issues. Next, determine who needs access and then provide it based only on that continuous granular controls and context. We all understand the importance of user identities. And as I mentioned, device identity is just as important. So to help limit risk exposure, we need to monitor every endpoint to ensure that it has a trusted identity, has security policies applied, and that the risk level for things like malware or data exfiltration have been measured, remediated, or deemed acceptable. For zero trust to be successful with devices, that means we need contextual data, not just the device health, and we have to have this constantly updated. In order to shift away from an implicit trust world, we also have to step back from traditional software like VPNs and DMZs. These tend to rely on implicit trust, frequently bringing in IP-based user tracking and logs, even though IP in itself is a weak identifier. So I'll touch upon this more in just a bit. And finally, the assumption we're working under is that threat actors are already within the system. Maybe it's a bit scary to think about, but if you start here, the question shifts from trying to block an ever-expanding list of entry points to how you can reduce lateral movement in event of a breach. Continuous monitoring and the right security checks here are key. When we take a look at the old model of network security, zero implicit trust is tough. From this next map here, you'll see that the approach of these traditional networks is to connect and then authenticate. Next slide. This model here shows cloud environments that uses VPN to protect resources. Users authenticate into the VPN and then are granted full access to all the resources on the network, whether or not they actually need it or need it at that time. This offers a greater attack surface due to its higher level of access and implicit trust. However, looking at newer network models, like what Twingate provides, gets us to this next mapping. This actually goes ahead and shifts the authentication forward. This step is required, or this authentication step is required before connecting and then repeated in order to maintain access. This satisfies the least privilege principle, is flexible enough to support a variety of both policy requirements and resources, and also helps to optimize performance. So consideration number 4, as you might imagine, making a shift from the traditional to newer network models requires work not only on the user and device side, but also on the resources. So making changes across all of your systems isn't an easy task by any means, and the process can be pretty involved. But the great thing is that 1, it's clear to break down the work into sizable chunks over time. And 2, the cost and additional effort and budget doesn't actually have to be that high. For many, implementing zero trust is more a matter of moving existing budget and investing in solutions that IT and security teams just aren't currently using. And while education and training are crucial both for end users as well as IT staff, it's a one-time lift that leads to long-term benefits. A TEI report between Forrester and Microsoft looked into overall ROI and investments into zero trust, focusing on their specific approach. And they found that after 3 years, enterprise organizations had a 92% ROI due to end user productivity, lower infrastructure costs, IT savings, improved security management, improved identity management, and more. Finally, the last consideration is that there are no silver bullets. Even though the concept of zero trust has been around for a while, it's still evolving and being redefined. So as a result, there isn't a universal solution that's going to work for every organization and guarantees protection across all facets of zero trust. Instead, approach zero trust from a broad strategic perspective through the inventory, phases, and systems breakdown that we've discussed today. Recognize that tools are still evolving and changing. Some may be a great fit for your specific use case, whereas others may be a not now situation. Across the different factors of zero trust, the biggest opportunity that we see today is specifically in devices, as we're in a fascinating intersection of changes to how people work, increased risk threats, and new tools and systems being constantly implemented. Device security and awareness is incredibly important, but it's hard to find systems and tools that enable both granularity and consistency across all platforms. Implementing zero trust isn't always straightforward. There's no lift and shift that's immediately going to work for all of your employees and all of your vendors and folks. And so this is why, honestly, it means so many different things to different groups. However, hopefully I've convinced you that the benefits outweigh the costs and that it's achievable with just a few extra considerations and early planning. As zero trust continues to develop, my hope is that not only will organizations be able to shift and move to this more granular and secure model, but also that maybe someday we'll actually agree to what zero trust actually is. So this wraps up the prepared portion. Thanks so much again for taking the time to join us today. We'll be opening this up for questions and discussions. It'd be great to hear about some of the challenges and issues that you're experiencing and going through today.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that, Anna. So as she had mentioned, if you use the chat feature or the Q&A feature, we'll be getting to those questions here in a minute. If we do not have time, we'll of course follow up as well. But to answer some of the initial questions that came in during registration, let's just kind of go through those. So Anna, let's go with our first one. Based on conversations with your users, which more specifically are our customers and their users and our customers, where did they typically start with their zero trust journey?
Yeah, so I mean, going back to that question of, should this user on this device in this context be able to access this resource? Identity is generally that key starting point. So implementing an IDP or just broadly the identity as a service. After that, then it's really going usually to that resources section. So how really taking that question and simplifying it down to, should this user be able to access this resource? Those are the first two things that we typically see. The next steps are trickier, that device management and context. Those areas are still a little bit more fragmented and harder to implement and integrate in. So we're excited to hopefully, through Twingate, make this an easier process so that the device and context parts are similarly easy to address.
Great. Yeah, thank you for that. So next question that we have is, what are some of the primary use cases you see for needing zero trust network access? Be that performance improvements for DevOps, to access things like Terraform, use cases like those.
Yeah. So over the past few years, we've seen a lot of big changes in how work is getting done. First, it was more best of breed and shifts to cloud-based apps, and then it's people becoming more distributed over the past couple of years. So, kind of coming to your question of primary use cases, security is obviously the biggest one, as it's not as easy to create that perimeter or create those walls to really keep everything and everyone locked in. But as you mentioned, there's a lot of other interesting use cases that have come up. So on DevOps side, we've seen it become much easier to just roll out and manage the resources, especially using Terraform, as you mentioned, or a lot of the other new systems that just make it much easier to automate that resource rollout, management, and monitoring. Another thing I wanted to call out is on the end user side. Right. So you also see those performance and also just user experience gains with zero trust. It frequently means moving away from bulky solutions and instead focusing on, or enables end users to focus on, getting the work that they need to get done. So things like split tunneling and only needing to verify or re-verify access at certain points helps to really keep kind of security from being your productivity blocker.
Great. Yeah, thank you for that. And then it looks like our final question, unless another one comes in, is what are some of the ways I can push for internal buy-in on building a zero trust strategy?
So I think that there's a lot of benefits to a couple of the different sort of personas or users that are affected here. So starting from the biggest bucket, right? It's your end users. You get those productivity gains. It's easier to get work done. It's less confusing. We're trying to eliminate that question of, oh, I'm trying to do X, but I keep on hitting errors or keep hitting those blocks. Next up, we chatted a little bit about DevOps. So it makes it much easier to roll out and manage resources, both those apps as well as more complex internal environments, servers, especially as everything is moving more and more to the cloud. And then finally, and I think this is generally where the strongest arguments are, is really kind of coming back to that admin and security perspective. right? So with zero trust, you can get granular access. It's easier to manage. You can integrate in with a lot of the existing systems and tooling that are already keeping an eye out on things like identity and devices. There's a lot of players in the overall security market that are coming at the problem in different ways. So IDPs, NDMs, EMMs, everything there. So with zero trust, you can start bringing in together the best of each of these solutions. And the goal really becomes figuring out how to connect and build a platform approach, so you have a full picture on your overall security, and you're not just relying on a single aspect. So at Twingate, we talk a lot about defense in depth. So how can you build in additional checks so you get more confidence as opposed to just relying on a single one?
Excellent. Well, it looks like we don't have any additional questions at this time, so that concludes today's presentation and Q&A. If you do have any additional questions, feel free to send it over our way. You can use the contact form on our site. Happy to send that over to Anna as well. Quick housekeeping. So a month or two ago, we actually soft launched a free or starter tier version of Twingate. So if you have not yet been exposed to us, I know we still have the 2-week trial, but for teams of 5 and under, we're trying to make zero trust as accessible as possible. So now that is an option for y'all to give that a whirl. But if you have any questions or you're interested in Twingate, obviously reach out to us. There's a demo form on our site. We will also be sending out the recording of this presentation, hopefully tomorrow, if not early next week. But otherwise, we look forward to seeing you on our next event. And thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.